Richard Foy here to tell us about archives. So we'll welcome Richard.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga rora, inga tēnā mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. Ko Aotearoa te whenua, ko Rimataka te maunga, ko Rongoronga te awa. Ko Wong Akso, Wong Jim, toko tupuna no heina iei. Ko Ngāti Siip, toko iwi. Ko Wong Chun, toko hapu. Ko Wong, toko whanau. Ko Wong Guokwhi, toko tupuna, toko ungoa, tuturu. Ko Richard Foy, aho. Ko o te tūmaki o te roa mahara o te kawanatanga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora tātou. You've come to the talk. It's the Tangata talk, which I didn't give it the name, Learnings from the Chief Archivist, because I was a bit worried about this, like, oh, what have I learned? And then I'm going to share. So I think Kelly might have put the name up there. I don't know precisely how long this talk's going to take, because I've never quite given this content. So it'll be like 45 minutes to 4 hours. So whatever. I've got some meetings later, but whatever. So yeah, it was Learnings from the Chief Archivist. I decided to change it. It's going to be Yearnings from the Chief Archivist, because these are some of the things that I think about and worry about. And this is my little avatar. I'm going to use that to represent me when I'm trying to be a little bit cheeky. Okay. So let me just start with a little bit about myself and where I'm from. I'm kind of going to guess that you guys are pretty astute. You've got good visual acuity. You've sort of seen me. You kind of probably got, figured out where I might come from based on my black hair, my brown eyes with the sort of slight angle feature on them. And you'd be right. I'm from Wainemata, which is a beautiful place, the heartland of New Zealand. And some of you may have actually watched Heartland, which is a television show that had Gary McCormick make terrible fun of a woman, which I can't remember her name anymore. It doesn't matter. But this is what New Zealand's heartland looks like. This is what Wainemata looks like. This is only taken a couple of years ago. It's fantastic, isn't it? So it's Wainemata. Recently I had a trip to the Lower Hutt, and we use Apple Maps to guide us. And Siri, rather interestingly, couldn't pronounce Wainemata very well. And Siri kept saying Wainometer. So if you're ever going to Wainometer, you might need to use that when you're talking to your phone. My family had a little fruit shop on Queen Street, which is the main street there, and that's this little place here, Wainui Fruit Mart, when Mart was a thing, fresh taste best. This was pretty much the heart of the Foy retail empire. It kind of really didn't grow beyond there because Amazon came along. Okay, and otherwise it would have taken off. This is a picture. It's from my own personal archive. This is my mum and me. And you can see that my dad was a really good photographer because he's got this interesting kind of photographic artifact in there, which is probably the loop of the thing. So my talk's going to be a bit about Archives New Zealand. It's going to be about our mahi, our kaupapa. It's going to be a little bit about my role as Chief Archivist and what I've learned from it and what I'm still learning. And a little bit about the future that we're trying to move into. So it's an interesting label, Chief Archivist, and a lot of people, when I came into the role, in fact I didn't probably know as much as I should have known coming into the role, but when I came into the role, people often asked, what was Chief Archivist? One of my older brothers, who's an idiot, he says, oh Richard, you're kind of like the director of artifacts. I was like, no, I don't work in a museum as such. But my family sort of thought, well, yeah, you kind of like just dealing with old stuff, so you're kind of like being an archaeologist, like Indiana Jones, which was very appealing, might I add, very appealing. But no, that is not what I'm like. Actually, though, if I take the archaeologist adventurer thing a little bit further, maybe I could be like Tomb Raider and Lara Croft. But again, no, not likely. I did find this. This is something that I thought does encapsulate somewhat well what my job is. Sounds good.
Are you having a problem, Master Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a bit dark in there, but this is from Attack of the Clones, one of the prequel films. We won't speak about that ever again. But what it does show is Jo Castanew. Jo Castanew is kind of like what I do. She's a Master Jedi. She's the head of the Jedi Archives. She's talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi. You might have heard of that. He's not very well known. He's one of those sort of lesser Jedis. She is a kick-ass Jedi because she's got a lightsaber and she's on the Jedi Council. And she is the chief archivist of the Jedi Archives. So I think, yeah, I can live with that. I can be a Master Jedi. Yeah. This is what the Jedi Temple in Coruscant, which is the kind of central planet in Star Wars, looks like. And the Jedi Archive is within the Jedi Temple. You'll have a look at ours a little bit later on. Of course, we don't take up a whole planet. Archives New Zealand has 4 sites around the country, from Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. We're going to probably mainly talk about stuff that's related to what's happening here in Wellington, and I'll show you some pictures a little bit later on. So I'll just help zoom into where we're at just to help orient us. So I'm going to use Game of Thrones lingo here just to make it kind of interesting, because life's a bit boring otherwise. So we're called East Watch by the Sea, so we're on the wall. We're northerners, eh? Okay. National Library, that's Castle Black. This building here, we're Shadow Tower, and down below is King's Landing, where I don't know if you know Game of Thrones, but brothers and sisters sleeping together, crazy stuff. Political intrigue, that happens at home, not here. Okay, so this is the Jedi Archive. It's remarkable, but when they designed our archival repository, they used this kind of like as a template. I mean, look at that. It's like a perfect copy. It's like they 3D made it perfectly. So yeah, at National Archives, I'm the Lord Commander. At National Library, just down the street, which is just across the way, is the other Lord Commander, which is the National Librarian. Bill, no, hopefully Bill will come and do a talk a little bit later on. This is interesting because we've got some presents there at National Library. Some of you might have heard of that. Tohu, yeah? So it's this beautiful permanent exhibition for at least the next 25 years. It was opened on 19th of July last year. It's Archives New Zealand at National Library. I like to think of it as the best room in the house, my room and Bill's house. Inside that document room that's fashioned on a wakahuia are 3 really important documents for our nation and for our people. So is there anyone here, don't feel shy, is there anyone here who has not been to He Tohu? Okay. Wow. All right. Well, it's just across the road, so I'll pause the presentation now. You go, and we'll start again when you're back. All right. You must go. You must go. It is a really great experience. I could show you photos inside there, but I think that will take away from some of the grandeur and the magnificence and mana of those documents. So you really need to go. So National Library, Castle Black, Archives or National Archives, East Watch by the Sea. Library, Archives, Library, Archives. A lot of people are probably going, what the hell's the difference? I mean, they're both big buildings and you probably store old things in there. And I think that was part of the thing when I came into this role and people would talk to me, it's like, an archive and a library, it's all the same, right? You're just looking after old stuff. So we're going to delve into that. We're going to try and demystify a little bit about that. And the best way is to just Google it. So I did Google it the other night, checked the etymology, which is I guess the meaning of the 2 words, library and archive. So you see it here. And I'll zoom in for you in a moment, so don't worry. So an archive is largely focused on collections of records, and these records will be historical documents. They'll be about places, about institutions, about people. It comes from a word, is it archae? Archae and archiva, Latin and Greek, which really relates to government and records of, or public records of government. When we compare it to a library, library also has collections, but it has collections of, mainly books. You also get videos and DVDs, just like archives can have other media. But the purpose of those books is generally for use and borrowing by readers or members, if you've got a library card. And, the idea of a library, the word, is relating to books. So that's a really important distinction. Archive records, historical documents, public records of government versus collections of books for use or borrowing. Okay, we're gonna go into that in a little bit more detail. So let me compare records versus books. Yeah. These types of records, okay? The types of records which, you'll be familiar with because you're good record keepers, I'm sure. What happens if, I go to a library and put away the moral and philosophical elements of this, but if we burnt a book, we burnt Harry Potter's, I don't know what the books are. There we go, we burnt a copy of the book. That would be bad, some people would say tragic, but generally, because it's a published work, we can probably get a copy of it, okay? So, and this is a generalization, just to help me to make a point. But by and large, a lot of the books that the National Library will have, that it will get under legal deposit or collect, will be books that can be replaced because there'll be multiple copies. There are plenty of exceptions to that, so don't roast me, but just to make a point. But in general, and almost with great certainty, the records that we have are unique. There are, we can make copies of them, but the records, there is a source record that once it's gone, and we get sad about that. We get real sad about that. So a really good counterpoint to this is within the National Library, there's this thing called the Alexander Turnbull Library, which is really an archive. We won't go into that. So this thing about fire and destruction is something that is quite close to the archivist's world and to our heart and to our history. So in 1952, there was this building called the Hope Gibbons Building, had a big fire. It's on Taranaki and Dixon Street, Four Kings now, one of the great sports bars of New Zealand apparently. And because of the 1952 fire, government kind of realised that it needed to take better care of records and public archives. And therefore it created the Archives Act of 1957, which was the very beginning of our national archives. This is one of the survivors. I like to think of these guys as our little mascots because they survived the fire of 1952. But what I'm really trying to say is that records aren't just things on just bits of paper, they're actually evidence. So think about evidence, think about all the television shows that you watch, like, I don't know, CSI and stuff where they're trying to collect evidence. It might be fingerprints, it might be strands of hair. These elements of evidence, they record things about us, record events and transactions. It might be a land sale, it might be an interaction, it might be a minute. They record determinations and decisions that have been made by, in our case, government over years. Very important decisions at times. They record actions that government agencies or public officers have taken, entitlements that have been given. And really importantly, they record promises and commitments that have been made, sometimes by government or public officers to citizens. Think about that for a minute. Think about promises and commitments in relation to these documents, and probably most focusing on Te Tiriti, which is the Treaty of Waitangi, and over 540 signatures that are on that. Signatures of people who expected a certain commitment from the Crown. So these documents are, way more than just old documents. They're actually evidence. Think of them as evidence. Evidence of us, evidence of other people, evidence of things that have happened, promises that have been made, commitments taken. So when you have those things, when you have that evidence, those records also enable accountability. And we think about the Waitangi Tribunal, we think about how they've raised up the mana and the importance and significance of the Treaty of Waitangi and what that actually means and why we actually have to do things like treaty redress and treaty settlement. In terms of accountability, it's sometimes good to look at not so distant past. So I'm going to use here an example around the East German state secret police, the Stasi. You might have seen a film a few years ago called The Lives of Others. We actually use this film and the aspects of record keeping in this film to teach our archivists about some professional, professional concepts of archival science and record keeping. So it's a really good film. But it was set in 1984, The Lives of Others, and is really about a Stasi officer who was following the lives of two citizens, and their lives were being captured through surveillance and meticulously recorded. And we know this is just like real life, that film, because the Stasi did keep lots and lots of records. Here are a few of them. This is from the East German Stasi records, and the current archive that looks after some of those records. So look at these pictures. I like photos of shelves and boxes. I'll just say that. So like any chance I can put pictures of this kind of stuff, I'm there. So these are kind of like, oh, you sort of heart flutter there. But I mean, it's look how meticulous. These are dossiers, right? These are secret surveillance records, meticulously documenting people's movements, habits, relationships, things I've said, things I've done, scary stuff. So, on the one hand, that's kind of a world that's bound by secrecy and covert surveillance and a very sort of authoritarian sort of world. On the right-hand side is openness. Let me show you what shelving and storage looks like, the good stuff in this sort of open world. So there's Archives New Zealand up in Auckland. Lovely boxes. There's a National Library. Archives. Maps there, rolled up. Turnbull Library. I think these are ministers' papers and things. So I think there's kind of cool two things from that kind of mind. First of all, the banality of record keeping, because it kind of looks all the same, right? You keep records and it's on paper, or nowadays on computers. But the impact on people's lives can be very, very profound. So we keep things which we want to be open, we want to share them. We think that they add to the value of New Zealand in terms of our knowledge, our wisdom, our understanding of the world, our place in the world, our identity. The Stasi, not so much. They kept it to keep tabs on their citizens, to oppress people. So both of those scenarios, both of those worlds need record making and record keeping, but they're vastly, vastly different. So let's look just a little bit more around the Stasi and what happened with them. This shows someone who's sort of working on piecing together scraps of paper. That's odd. From these beautifully kept records, which any information management professional would go, yeah, that's cool, it's nice, to bins of paper, ripped up, shredded. Because when the East Germans, when the Stasi folded, when East Germany, I guess, eventually became reunified with West Germany and became a single Germany again, there was a lot of stuff that they didn't want to remember and they didn't want to be seen. So the Stasi deleted, well, they didn't delete, they shredded, and they actually got rid of a lot of records and tried to destroy them. And so they had new facilities to house them, but it wasn't the lovely records, it was about 15,000 bags, apparently, of sort of torn up records and surveillance notes. And those are the things that got stuck on shelves. And here's people rifling through it. Luckily, they used technology. This actually comes from a Wired magazine article from 2008. I actually have that issue. It was really cool, but I had to go to the web to get this. And basically using scanners to scan the fragments and then using software, and presumably some reasonably rudimentary intelligence back in the day, in order to reassemble the fragments into fixed pieces of paper again. Not ideal, okay? So this idea that if you want to forget the past, then you destroy and maybe have to reconstruct records and evidence. Now, whenever you watch a television show about the police or CSI, destroying evidence is not a good thing, right? You can get in trouble for that. That's like not a good thing to do. And here we see people destroying evidence. Evidence of us, but it's also evidence of them. When I say of them, evidence of the Stasi, evidence of their actions, of the state acting upon citizens. So evidence of us as citizens and evidence of them. That's kind of a very prosaic way to think of records as evidence. A metaphor that we very often use in our world we often refer to ourselves as memory institutions, archives and libraries and museums, memory institutions. So memories, the memories of us and the memories of them that have been forgotten and now need to be remembered. This is a really common thing that happens in terms of wiping away the past, trying to rewrite it, or just destroy what we know. So this is some big Buddhas in Bamiyan, which is I think Afghanistan, and when the Taliban took over, they destroyed these magnificent Buddhas. So 53 meters tall, long time ago they were made. That's what they looked like in 1963 before I was born. And in 2001, I think they used dynamite to basically get rid of it. Why? Because the Taliban didn't really want to have anyone remember what had happened in the past. Right. So removing the past is an important thing for authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. So I'm just going to refer to something that was in a comic that I did a couple of years ago. I'm not using much of it. And it's actually a strategy for how we might do digital stuff around for National Archives and Library. You can go find this later on. I can send people a link. But I wanted to refer to it because there's a little diagram in here that I like to use. And it's this idea, actually I'll go back, this notion that we, National Library and Archives, kind of form part of the memory system for New Zealand government. And we often say that National Library is the memory of New Zealand society, and Archives is the memory of New Zealand government, because we look after public records and public archives. So I just wanted to explore that and dig into that a little bit. This is some excerpts and some highlighted parts of the Public Records Act 2005, which is our authorising legislation. It's missing some bits, but the long one is kind of boring. Well, it's not boring, it's actually really good legislation. So it's boring, it's quite exciting. But I'm not going to go through all of that. I just wanted to highlight a few pertinent parts here of the Public Records Act, PRA. First of all, that it's enabling government to be held accountable. So that means taking note of things that government has done and ensuring that some natural justice, natural law can actually apply, and that government can be held to account for the decisions it takes and the actions it takes. It's about ensuring that records are created, because you need to make them and create them first, and that they be well maintained. That we provide access and that we preserve those records into the long term. We're not talking about just remembering for a year or 5 years. It could be remembering for many, many years, just like the Declaration of Independence and the Treaty of Waitangi and the suffrage petition, quite old records. It's about the creation and preservation of public archives. So when those records cease to be useful for the officers that created them, and if they have long-term enduring value for our country, then they get transferred to us after usually 25 years. And we only hold a fraction of the records that would be kept by government or created by government, maybe 4 to 10%, say, because a lot of them can be disposed of. And we'll get to that in a moment. And we do this for historical, for cultural and heritage, for national identity and accountability reasons. That's why the Act lives, that's why archives exist. And we do this in the spirit of Te Tiriti. Archives is allowed to issue standards. We get to monitor public officers and the way they make and create and preserve and provide access to those records. And we report on compliance. There's a report that comes out every year from the Chief Archivist. I just did one. Well, I didn't do it. It comes under my name, but I work with some of my people, and we put that up to Parliament just recently. And it's got some really interesting things in there. Great reading. Go and have a look at it. It was on 1840 a little while ago. The bit I really want to point out, though, is this bit here, which is no person may dispose of or authorise the disposal of public records or protected records except with the authority of the Chief Archivist. That's quite serious stuff. Because that provision and that clause is about trying to prevent this kind of carry-on from happening. Now, of course, if you have a sort of totalitarian regime, then, you know, probably don't listen to the Chief Archivist, or you have the Chief Archivist on your thumb. But this was what is meant by that. This is what we're trying to prevent, the wanton destruction of evidence, of memories of us and of them. I thought I would go back to Star Wars for a moment. Republic versus Empire, which is kind of like Jedi versus Sith. Tomorrow is May the 4th, so it's a pretty big day. But I'll use this because I showed you earlier the Jedi Temple and the Jedi Archive. Did you know that the Empire, they also have an archive? Their one's the Imperial Archive, and I think they had a number of them, but it was on the planet Scarif. You don't need to know where Scarif is. And I wanted to show you this video. This little video is frankly, it's probably PG. Frankly, it's got some pretty disturbing and graphic things in it, but I think you're okay, you're grown-ups. Okay, so just...
You may fire when ready.
That's the archive. That's the Imperial Archive. Right. Okay. Phew! What you just saw was an unauthorized disposal. Disposal of records that I'm pretty sure Grand Moff Tarkin did not have the written permission of the Imperial Archivist in order to leak. So that kind of stuff is not on. And you know, I kind of joking, but not really joking, but it's equivalent to like, if Colin McDonald decided that he wouldn't do this, okay? He's a big believer in the PRA, but just to show how, you know, how this is. If he sort of said to Elaine, his PA, I need you to delete all that stuff about Richard. I don't think he's got any files on me, but just suppose he did, okay? You know, we've had a lot of conversation about stuff, and I don't agree with some things he's saying he wants to do. Just delete them all, you know, and those decisions, we're going to get rid of them. You know, he really probably can't do that, you know, according to the Public Records Act. And it's an interesting power. It's a statutory power, independent power that's given to me and to archives through the Public Records Act. And it's there for a reason. You know, it's not something we have to bang on about too often, but it's something that is about the constitutional role of Archives New Zealand, as opposed to the sort of cultural and heritage and curiosity role that we have. And this idea of public record keeping, if we add it together with things like the Privacy Act and the Official Information Act, we, I think, move from just being about the memory of government to being about what I coined this term. I did a Google on this, and I don't think this term exists, but the conscience of government. So when you think about what the Ombudsman is about, fairness for all, really, there probably is an Ombudsman Act, but it certainly relies heavily on the Official Information Act, 1982, quite old. The Privacy Act that the Privacy Commissioner looks after, 1993, it's 25 years old, and I think they're reviewing that. And then the Public Records Act 2005, which replaced the Archives Act 1957. So we have this kind of, I call it a triad. I'm told, because I'm Chinese, so why wouldn't I call it a triad? But the good things of a triad, which is three. But you can think of it as a triumvirate, you could think of it as the Holy Trinity, you can think of it as like, you know, just like a club that really works together, I think, around being instruments of accountability. And that's kind of funny to think of myself as like an instrument of accountability. Does that make me a tool? So the reason why this is kind of really important to us now, I don't know if people know, post-truth became a word, and I found this out the other day. 2016, the Oxford Dictionaries, which I didn't know was dictionaries, I thought it was just one of them. It's a bit like libraries, it's libraries. Oxford Dictionaries, word of the year 2016 was post-truth. And when we think about what post-truth means to us today, it isn't really just about a time after truth. It's actually about, I think more worryingly, for us who work as public servants in government for the public, for citizens, about a post-trust era that we might come into being. And this has horrible connotations, we think, in 1984. Now remember that Lives of Others was set in 1984 because the Stasi were operating in 1984. And in 1984, in George Orwell's book, he talked about, you know, a very dystopian type of world, a very totalitarian state. Oceania, which is kind of where we live in the world, on the planet. Big Brother was a thing, not suggesting that Edward Snowden is Big Brother, but he actually knows a heck of a lot about Big Brother. This notion of newspeak, new language, new lingo, in order to change how we speak about things, the words we use in order to, I guess, inform and infect our thinking. So fake news, alternative facts is very much, I think, in that space. And probably even worse is this idea of doublethink that Orwell spoke about, which is a way of rewriting history and then somehow believing what you rewrote as being the new truth, and that lies can become truth because cognitive dissonance doesn't actually exist in that world. You can say two things, black is white, white is black, and like, yeah, cool. And that we see that on Twitter a lot, don't we? Some people tweet that a lot. So 1984, and actually if I sort of think about some other kind of dystopian sort of things, Handmaid's Tale, Fulfilled by Destruction of Information, you think, oh yeah, but you know, that's not real. Well, I don't know. So some of you have probably heard about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and I guess all the unintended consequences of social media, us putting our lives out there, the lives of us, not just of others, into the social media sphere. Facebook then providing that information without too many controls, without regulation, to companies like Cambridge Analytica in order to generate income, to help advertisers sell things to us. So I think, yeah, this stuff is real. It's not kind of make-believe anymore, unfortunately. So that tells me that the conscience of government is very much something that we should care about. Now, what I just talked about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, that's in the private sector. That's not something that, in fact, that's something that governments around the world are trying to grapple with. So the European Union GDPRS is trying to, General Data Protection, don't know what the R stands for, maybe regulatory system, who knows, is trying to figure out how it can deal with things like privacy. But it's not just privacy, it's also just the massive amount of data that's out there and the way it's being able to be correlated. And governments got some abilities and powers to do that now. Maybe government's not the biggest thing to worry about, maybe it's private sector. This guy, A.C. Grayling, who's a philosopher, he's master of the College of Humanities, somewhere in the UK, he came and did a talk recently at the Writers and Readers Festival. I don't know if anyone saw it. I listened to it on Radio New Zealand on the weekend, and it was great. It was actually about democracy and the rise of democracy from very ancient times, the Greeks and Athenians, through to reasonably contemporary times. So the idea of democracy is actually a pretty new idea in the last few hundred years. Before then it was, aristocracies, and it was the aristocracy, according to the Greeks and Athenians, was about ruled by the best, the smartest, the best, the most, those with the best character, the most integrity, not necessarily those who had the most money and land. So something went awry along the way. But in the last couple of centuries, we've had the rise of democracies, Western democracies, and everyone looking to them. And A.C. Grayling has said there's a real concern that emerging countries who are kind of trying to rise up and become global players aren't necessarily looking to democracies as being the best forms of government to emulate or to become. They look at the United Kingdom, and with Brexit, they look at the United States and their presidency, and they think, maybe that's not so good. Maybe actually China is a good model. They get things done. They're efficient. But one of the things that A.C. Grayling said, which I really liked, which is why I wrote this down, government needs to be responsible, it needs to be accountable, transparent, and recordable. So there's that records word. You need to be able to record what government has done in order for those other things to happen, which is why I always think of archives, the National Archives, Archives New Zealand, as having that really important constitutional role. We're part of the very fabric of the type of democracy and the type of representative democracy and lifestyle that we have here in New Zealand that accords us many, many rights and values. And those could be easily eaten away. But record keeping, public record keeping, is a fundamental part of that to enable accountability. Just like having an unhindered media and press, an investigative press, just like having official information or freedom of information are fundamental parts, and an independent judiciary and separation of powers. So A.C. Grayling sort of has talked about things where, he's seen things kind of go awry in this country. So there's something called the Windrush scandal, which is about, and I didn't realise it was not that long ago, around 2012, when the United Kingdom had a really, really kind of draconian anti-immigration sort of policy, trying to stop people from sort of African and Caribbean descent from staying in the UK. They were trying to make people self-deport, make it so difficult for them to be in the country that they'd go, I'm out of here. So at that time it was really about the release of secret information, kind of freedom, official information, being held accountable. The more recent scandal relating to Windrush is just the wanton destruction of records relating to that affair. And so, yeah, it's not good for accountability, but it's not going to be good for historians, researchers, and government. We've kind of had a little bit of this kind of stuff ourselves. I'm in this country because my grandfather came into the country because of the Chinese Immigrants Act of 1881 and poll tax. He got a little certificate when he came in the country. You're going to get a certificate today if you come in here, right? Yeah, no. So he had his fingerprints taken. They didn't take his thumbprints. Took his fingerprints, signed it there, and over a series of trips back and forth between New Zealand and China, he had his photo taken. And I'm actually really thankful, and it's kind of cool to be chief archivist because that's a public record, that's a public archive, that's in Auckland Archives, that photo and that poll tax certificate. That's the only photograph, well no, there are multiple photographs of them, but all the photographs of my grandfather are in the National Archives. We do not have any as a family. And he died well before I was born, and I guess we didn't have access to that kind of stuff. And if there were any, they probably got burned. So Archives New Zealand is probably the best place to keep them, and they've been digitised. So that's fantastic. I have access to that. So we're really, really thankful for those. Because of the Immigrants Act and the poll tax and all that affair that happened with Chinese immigrants coming to New Zealand, like my grandfather and my family, there was redress, there was accountability for that. So eventually in 2002, the New Zealand government made an apology. Yeah. We're all good now, me and Helen. We're all good. It's like, no worries. Yeah. So it doesn't just, Public Records Act doesn't just enable accountability, but it also enables us to regulate. So when we talk about regulation and harm, so whenever you think of harm like health and safety, there's regulation, it's a Work Safe Act, I think, and there's lots of things where there's harm in the community and there's regulation to prevent that or to take away the edge of it. We think about things like Class 4 gambling, poker machines. DIA does the regulation around that, censorship, and even sending spam. There's regulation around that. So the PRA, the Public Records Act, provides regulation of the public record-keeping system and of all officers that are part of that system to ensure that government can be held accountable. And why is this important? Isn't New Zealand just a beautiful place? Well, it kind of is. So Transparency International, they are part of Transparency International. New Zealand is part of the global group, and they talk about how this idea of having trusted integrity systems, and where it's a combination of the government, the public service, bureaucracy, politicians, business, civil society, businesses, daily life of people, that they should be able to live free of corruption because we should have a better economy. We should have kids who are safe to grow up here. We should be able to live our lives without fear of, of oppression and wrongdoing. And the other thing on their site says New Zealand has one of the most trusted public sectors in the world, and they're committed to working with us, working with the State Services Commission on keeping that good. How do we know this? Because there's like a number. There's a leaderboard, Corruption Perceptions Index 2017. Booyah! Rank 1! We're like the gold standard. We're like the gold standard. Well, we are at the moment, because actually it doesn't take long for trust and confidence of the public, of citizens, of the nation, of the world, to maybe not trust or believe in government. So you have things like that, you have things like text messages sent, and one of those text messages, voicemails and not voicemails. By the way, a voicemail left with a board chair that works for a public office, that is a public record, despite what people might say. So we've survived one burning platform. This was literally our first burning platform which was a big fire that destroyed a whole bunch of public records and that made government stand up. What's kind of the burning platform for us now? I would say it's things like digital disruption. It's stuff like, you know, the population not trusting and believing in the authority of certain information. So things like accountability and trust and confidence have been eroded. It's also our customers and our stakeholders who are fundamentally different than 100 years ago because they have grown up in a world where they expect instant access and easy, unfettered access to information and wonder why they can't have it. Where they're not wanting to be denied access simply because they don't have the privilege of being close to a library or close to an archive, or in one of the 4 centres where we have a building and have a presence. And it's also about the fact that technology has risen up not just in terms of consumer interfaces with users and access information, but also the very public record keeping systems and the systems of record that we have are now technology based. Yeah, we do have paper records, we print things out, but fundamentally they're now sitting in information systems in bits and bytes, sometimes in the cloud, and they need to be managed. Records will need to be disposed of. Some records will need to be transferred to us. They need to be accessible, and they need to be accessible through things like the Official Information Act and the Privacy Act. So our response is, you know, like any good institutional organisation, we have a strategy. So we have the strategy Archives 2057, we've also got it today. It's very much thinking about the future and what our response to it will be. I'm not going to go into great detail in here, just talk really about the 3 themes, because you can go and have a read of the strategy. The first one, though, was around taking archives to the people, and this is the idea about us unlocking the latent value that's held in our holdings and our records in vast quantities and making them much more available through the digital environment, because that's where our customers are and that's where they expect to find what we have. But it also means making them much more accessible to iwi and te Māori through better metadata and being able to provide different access paths, so you don't have to be some kind of archival nerd guru who understands the 4 little, you know, I don't know if anyone's ever used Archway. It's hard, and you need to actually kind of have some understanding of it, or you need to come and talk to our people to do it. We don't want it to be that way. Upholding transparency is about that notion of transparency which begets accountability that comes from good record keeping. And actually thinking about transparency and good record keeping is something that starts at the point of creation of a record, at the point of creation of evidence, not 25 years when it comes to us. So we need to make sure that public officers and the here and now, and using the technologies that they're afforded with and the tools they have, in order to create, make, maintain, preserve, make accessible, and one day transfer those records to us. And that maybe transparency starts right in those public offices and doesn't have to go through OIAs and Privacy Act or PRA. And then finally, building systems together is sort of looking at that kind of idea of a regulated system of many thousands of public officers around New Zealand who fall under the Public Records Act, who are regulated parties. And we need to build that future together, because, you know, we're not going to be using just paper records anymore and shuffling them around. We're building digital systems of records that need to work together, and therefore we need to build that future system together, not in isolation and not just through edict from the Chief Archivist. I apologise to you right now, Michelle, for this photo that I'm going to put up. I promised robots, and you might be thinking, oh yeah, cybernetic kind of hybrid, where Michelle is trying to become. No, she's actually got a VR goggle. And this is kind of related to future, because some of the data, some of the records, some of the information that we're going to hold and have to make accessible are not just paper records that now have become Word documents or Excel spreadsheets. Michelle is looking at a point cloud, which is a 3-dimensional scanned model of the world that is virtually vomited into her goggles that allows you to roam around a record of a built environment. And as organisations like LINS or construction companies, maybe Emily does this, I don't know, as more and more things are using that kind of technology, the data we need to keep track of and we need to maintain as records, as evidence, as memories, is going to be weird and wonderful. I don't know, and we were thinking, God, how are we going to make that kind of thing accessible in the future? But she kind of looked like a robot, which is why I put that there. I will talk about robots and machine learning though, because it is something that we've started to think about and we want to explore. If you haven't seen it, you should go to Netflix and watch this documentary called AlphaGo. It's about Google's AlphaGo artificial intelligence software, which was designed to play and win at the game of Go. Now, if you don't know the game of Go, that's okay. It's kind of looks a little bit like this. It's a board with, I think, 10 by 10 or 100 by 100. It's got lots and lots of little dots in it, and you put little pebbles, white pebbles or black pebbles. That's all you need to know. It's a real hard game, comes from China. It has traditionally been thought impossible that it would be a very, very long time until artificial intelligence, before computers and machines could play the game of Go as well as, say, the game of chess. So chess has been, you've heard of was it Kasparov and IBM's Deep Blue, happened quite a few years ago, probably about a decade, where a grandmaster was beaten, thrashed, I understand, by a computer. And they've been waiting to find a computer and the computer software that could beat the world sort of, world master of Go. I'm not going to tell you what happens. This is a spoiler. But obviously, there's a good story, and you should go watch it. There's some interesting things about it, because partly is about machine intelligence and artificial intelligence and neural networks and how they work. But it's also about this interesting relationship we have with technology and how it's not just about us versus them. So it's actually being able to learn from some of the game playing strategies that the computer has. And that actually makes us sometimes go, wow, I wouldn't have imagined that was a good move. And actually how it improves our abilities. So there's a really great story. The reason I bring that up is because we've started to have a look at, and even tried a few trials, at doing one of those other things that I was always told would be impossible, that would never be able to be done. Look, Richard, we can get computers to do OCR and they can do transcription of like typed words and stuff like that, but they'll never be able to transcribe and read and do recognition of cursive writing. I mean, even humans can't do that. And we're starting to look at doing that. And in fact, Transcribus is an open source project where it actually does it. Because it doesn't do it entirely on its own. It does it through collection of lots and lots of data and lots of experiments and trials that humans will read some join-up writing, they'll transcribe it, and by getting enough of those lessons, the machine neural network will learn. And it's one of those interesting things that in some ways it's inscrutable. We don't even understand. We understand conceptually how it figured it out, but being able to actually then describe that, how it figured it out, is almost beyond us. And that's when we get into some very, very interesting realms around accountability in the future. So in the Chief Archivist's annual report, there's a thing about algorithmic accountability. How do we hold government to account when algorithms and machines are making decisions about us in terms of our eligibility, our entitlements, or determinations? If the machine's as complex as some of these artificial intelligence neural networks are, then it's going to be really difficult. So that's work that we need to do. And I think that's me. Right. Spoken for long enough. Thank you. So we have a little bit of time if anyone wants to ask any questions or I don't know, yeah, anything, please.
I have a question, but it's in regard to your talk last year. My friends and I attended another good talk when you were exploring the Chinese heritage.
Oh yeah.
12 months later, is there any follow-up in regard to your story?
Still Chinese? Well, I haven't done a DNA test because I heard that's kind of like creates a few dodgy things. I almost don't want to know. No, we've nothing really major. I think it's just we've added to that information. Yeah. So yeah, still Chinese. My father still, well, he's dead now, and we're not changing his name, but yeah, he definitely had a fake name, part of that sort of fake stuff. And we only knew this because of the great record keeping that's been done. Yeah.
Question. What's your view on what I could call citizen participation or crowdsourcing of archive.
Yeah. Well, see, that transcribers actually does rely on crowdsourcing because it relies on people to volunteer their time to read the joined up writing, type the transcription, and that if you do that at scale, then the neural network can then start to figure it out for itself. But are there other forms of archiving you're thinking of?
Thinking of, you can tour around New Zealand and visit, obscure small places like Naseby or somewhere. There they have a little museum and it's got local records and artefacts from family that have sort of made the first step out of somebody's family home or the rubbish dump. Yeah. And in there, and how could we pull that all together into a more coherent whole for our country?
That would be fantastic. I mean, those records wouldn't come to us. If they were given to anyone, they'd probably go to the Turnbull, but they may not meet some of their needs.
There's increasingly those places are digitalising their own content, and there's platforms available that they're using to get content out, and then part of DIA/National Library is the Digital New Zealand aggregator, so they can then feed their records into one central aggregator that then can go and digitise or Digital New Zealand content.
Does that apply to citizens as well?
Can do, but it's harder for individuals.
Well, no, I appreciate that. Like say, for example, I organised and ran a club for 10 years, and I've got a whole lot of personal records of that club that I think might have some value, that might not, of course, but, what would somebody do with those sorts of things, or what would a small group that's never quite risen to being noticed by anyone in government do?
Yeah, well, there is a notion of community archives.
Yeah, so there is there's a tool that Archives New Zealand does look after called the Community Archive, which basically surfaces that citizen-generated records. So and a little bit further down the track so that's is led by Archives and the heritage communities. But I think that we need to rethink our whole approach around that.
Yeah, because I mean, we have limited resources, and that's probably one area that doesn't get enough love. But that the sector, the record keeping sector, tells us they want us to do more leadership in. Some of these things, I think it's going to be like a village to raise a child. So some of those things need to be working amongst multiple institutions who have some stake in that.
Yeah, I'd see there's some sort of leverage in the crowdsourcing, you're getting all these people eyeballs and elbows. Yeah, helping with this initiative.
Anything else?
Sort of a vague comment, and it's because of course you left me concerned with that image of the Master Jedi's archive disappearing into the
that was the Imperial. That was the
yeah.
Imperial archive. The Jedi one. Yeah. I think that got destroyed in a fire actually.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, that at the moment the Public Records Act is your sort of power base. Is that correct? And as we're going into these new sort of worlds of creating records and blah blah blah. I mean, how adequate do you think the Public Records Act is in its present form to sort of act as that?
Yeah. It's pretty good. I mean, it's not. I think it's done in the right way in that it's reasonably agnostic around technology. So it's good that it hasn't set itself to fail from a future perspective. And in archives we talk about data information as being almost synonymous with records. So I think one of the more interesting issues is other authorities and parties within government having a stake in this. So the Government Chief Digital Officer, Colin McDonald, and the Government Chief Data Steward, which is the government statistician, and how there might actually be confusion in that information management space if we're not careful. But it remains that the PRA gives me and us the statutory independence and the statutory powers to manage public records. But it'll be just like the Privacy Act and the Official Information Act. At some point, there will need to be a review of it. I don't think it necessarily needs to happen right away. Yeah, but it's worth thinking about. Yeah.
A lot of the emerging forms of public records are very different to print records. As you say, they're not really equivalents anymore, they're quite different. Yeah. That's traditionally been the case, and historically, librarians and archivists have not been paid very well, which seems to be something of a complicating factor. What can you see in terms of the HR implications of the change to the way records are being made?
Yeah, well, we talk at Archives about, does it work best to take an archivist and inject digitalism, that's not a real word, I bet, into their DNA so that they become those sort of future digitally capable archivists, or to take people who are digital specialists and give them archival expertise? I think it's probably a bit of a combination. I mean, I'm not an archivist by training. Did computer science at university, and very much a sort of a technology, digital sort of person. They're interested, but the whole world is becoming that way. It's not something that's just information management and us as professionals, but we've got some work that's looking at workforce planning and a bit of a strategy around that. But what are the roles, capabilities we need, and then we'll have to figure out how do we afford that.
Richard, can I just ask you a question? I'm a historian, so that's where I come from, so I understand around original records. But that could leave us with a vast sea of material to maintain physically. And I was just wondering how you and your team, and is it something you're addressing, because I know it's a very sensitive topic, how you balance the storing the original and keeping the original versus having something that is digital, preservation digital, and we can afford to let this go.
Right. There is some guidance on this, if I'm right. I remember someone asking about this, like, for real. Not saying your question is for real, but I'm pretty sure there's some guidance on this from Archives New Zealand around it. I couldn't tell you precisely, but it's something to do with, there are times when it's okay to destroy the original if it's been digitised appropriately. But this whole thing of, do we have too many records out there? We mustn't forget that part of the record keeping system is the permission to dispose of some things, either using the general disposal authorities or to have a proper structured disposal authority that's signed off by the chief archivist. So a lot of organisations needn't actually struggle under the weight for all the stuff they have. They just need to actually reapply their DAs appropriately, or in some cases create them, because there's lots of public offices that still don't have disposal authorities.
So they just keep it by default.
Because actually they don't want to be in breach of the Act.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, all right, maybe the last one, because I think it's one.
Do you think there is, do you see at the moment a role for blockchain in the keeping of the record between governments and citizens?
Very much potentially. We've explored that as well. There was actually, you were at that thing a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? The VUW thing, on blockchain. Though that seems not nearly as straightforward, because I think there have been some problems and concerns around just the weight of the blockchain as it gets added to constantly. So I'm not too sure it really is good at internet scale, certainly not for sticking stuff into it, maybe as simply linking to metadata or linking to objects, but not as the primary store for the record or the system of record. But that's stuff, when I started first hearing about it, I thought, that could be really interesting for record keeping. But we need to probably experiment with it. Yeah. All right, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.